So have you ever stopped to think about those countries that maybe fly a bit under the radar in the big geopolitical discussions? But when you look closer, they have these incredibly complex, really ancient relationships. You might catch a headline here or there, right? But what really defines those connections deep down? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, the relationship between Nepal and China. It's very multifaceted. Our mission here is pretty straightforward, cut through the noise. We've gone through your notes, our own research, the latest articles, and we want to pull out the most essential insights for you. So you walk away with, a really solid grasp of this critical partnership. Get ready, because there's some surprising history here and some really significant modern strategic angles, too.
Absolutely. And it's more than just, two countries next door to each other. It really serves as a kind of living case study, showing how nations, especially mid-sized ones, navigate the gravitational pull of superpowers. They use those ancient ties, but also modern strategic needs to sort of carve out their own path. Especially now, with the global order shifting like it is, it reflects those bigger dynamics really well.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Starting right at the beginning seems crucial, because the sheer depth here is, well, it's remarkable. We aren't talking decades or even a century. Our sources show this connection, Nepal and China, it goes back over 2,000 years. Just think about that. 2 millennia. What could possibly shape such enduring ancient ties?
Yeah, that's a key point. These ancient connections, they weren't just accidental, not at all. They were really shaped by some powerful forces. You see the strong influence of Buddhism, for instance, that crossed these borders, fostering this shared spiritual and intellectual heritage between the regions. Then you had really vibrant trade, particularly carried out by Tibetan traders. That created strong economic links, corridors, and of course, just extensive cultural contacts over time, building bridges between communities, setting patterns that lasted for centuries.
It's pretty incredible to think about that long, rich history. But despite all those ancient interactions, there's this really significant gap, isn't there? Until the formal diplomatic relations were set up, which only happened in 1955. So you have this amazing 2,000-year backdrop. How did those ancient threads eventually weave into let's say, the formal political framework we see today, which is relatively recent?
Right.
And moving into that modern era, the political bedrock of the relationship seems built on a very clear principle, both nations upholding mutual respect. For sovereignty, for territorial integrity, how does that respect look in practice, specifically from Nepal's side?
Well, for Nepal, it translates very concretely into upholding the One-China policy. They say very clearly that Taiwan and Tibet are viewed as integral parts of China. That's their stance. And going along with that, Nepal has consistently limited the political activities of Tibetan refugees within its borders. So it's a clear demonstration of alignment on that core policy.
And flipping that, looking at China's side, our sources really highlight consistent support for Nepal. And it's not just, diplomatic pleasantries. It includes actual assistance, help with Nepal's internal affairs, and pretty significant support for its development goals. So thinking about that foundation, that political alignment, what does it really mean for the stability, the nature of their interactions day to day? Okay, so beyond that political alignment, where do we see the most tangible signs of this partnership? Is it in the economic links, the infrastructure projects that are quite literally building bridges and, well, a lot more between them?
Oh, absolutely. I think the first really big step in recent times was Nepal officially joining China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. That was 2017. But you also need to connect that to something really crucial that happened slightly before, the Petroleum Supply Agreement. Remember the Indian blockade in 2015? After that, Nepal signed a pretty landmark deal to import fuel from China. Now, that wasn't just a quick fix. It really marked a significant strategic shift for Nepal, diversifying its energy supply, moving away from, relying so heavily on just one source.
That is a major strategic pivot, definitely. And when you look at the infrastructure plans now, wow, they're ambitious. There's a feasibility study actively underway for that huge China-Sichuan-Lhasa-Kathmandu railway. I mean, that could be completely transformative, right? Potentially making Nepal a key transit hub.
A game changer, potentially.
Exactly. And beyond the railway, we're seeing ongoing road improvements, expanding border crossings, and Chinese investment is also flowing into Nepal's critical sectors like hydropower and communications, dam projects, digital infrastructure. Just pause and visualize that for a second. The potential impact of these huge projects on Nepal's connectivity, its economy, how could that reshape a nation? But as impactful as those big projects could be, the current trade picture tells a bit of a different story, doesn't it? It seems quite imbalanced. Nepal imports way more from China than it manages to export back. Can you break down the specifics of that imbalance a bit more?
Yes, that's correct. And the types of goods being traded really contribute to that deficit. Nepal's major imports from China, things like heavy machinery, electronics, ready-made clothes, manufactured goods. And on the flip side, what Nepal exports to China are primarily, well, agricultural products, handicrafts, carpets. So you have this situation, me buying high-value manufactured goods, selling lower-value raw materials or artisanal products. Structurally, that imbalance does pose a challenge for Nepal's economic development.
Right. But it's not entirely one-sided in terms of support mechanisms, is it? Our sources mention that Nepal does get some help to kind of mitigate this trade imbalance. Things like customs duty, exemptions from China, low-interest loans, even grants.
That's true. Those measures exist.
But thinking bigger picture, what are the long-term economic implications? For a smaller economy facing such a persistent trade deficit, even with those supportive measures in place. Okay, shifting gears a little. Beyond the politics and the economics, there's the cultural and educational side. These ties often play a really vital role, don't they? Strengthening the bond through, soft power, people-to-people links. That's often where the lasting connections are made.
Absolutely crucial. And we see very concrete examples. Think about the Confucius Institutes. They offer Mandarin language classes set up right there in Kathmandu and Pokhara. That directly helps cultural understanding. Plus, you have hundreds of Nepali students going to China every year for higher education. That really fosters these long-term connections. Mutual understanding builds up person by person, creating future bridges between the countries.
And tourism. We can't forget tourism. Lots of Chinese tourists visit Nepal. It's a significant economic input. Back in 2019, China was actually the second biggest source of tourists for Nepal.
Major source, yes.
So when you consider these cultural exchanges, the educational links, the tourism, how do they really add to the relationship, maybe in ways that go beyond just the official political or economic deals we've talked about? All right, let's bring this right up to the present. The current realities, the geopolitical situation. China has described Nepal as a sovereign friend and strategic partner. That's quite a strong label. But how does that fit into Nepal's wider foreign policy, especially given its very specific neighborhood?
That's the key question for Nepal, isn't it? What's really noticeable here is this complex dynamic, the competition, the rivalry between India and China. It directly impacts Nepal. It has to. And this dynamic creates, well, significant pressure on Nepal. Pressure to maintain what everyone calls a balanced policy in its foreign relations. It's a very delicate tightrope walk, really, trying to secure its own national interests while navigating these huge competing interests on either side.
And it's not just the external pressures affecting things. Our sources also flag internal challenges within Nepal, things like political instability at home. That has sometimes led to frustrating delays, hasn't it? Delays in actually implementing projects, even those really ambitious infrastructure plans we were just discussing. What happens when those stall?
Yeah, and beyond just the broader political instability, there are other specific practical challenges too. Things like managing the border effectively, day to day, and crucially, ensuring better market access for Nepali goods into China. That's still a hurdle. These are sort of ongoing issues that need constant work for the relationship to reach its full potential. So when you put all that together, what do you think are the biggest complexities for a country like Nepal? Trying to balance these two giant neighbors while pushing its own development. It's a uniquely strategic spot that really demands skillful diplomacy.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, it feels pretty clear that the Nepal-China relationship has definitely strengthened a lot in recent decades, particularly on the economic front and strategically too. Our sources really paint a picture of Nepal actively trying to keep its geopolitical balance, while at the same time deliberately strengthening ties with China, using that relationship for its own development, its own connectivity goals.
That's a good summary. And looking ahead, the expectations seem generally positive, especially in those areas we touched on. Railway connectivity becoming a reality, energy cooperation deepening, tourism bouncing back and growing, trade potentially becoming more balanced. There seems to be a clear vision, on both sides maybe, for an even higher level of engagement and ideally mutual benefit down the road.
We've seen how the last 2,000 years have shaped this relationship in the background, how the last few decades have really intensified it, brought it to the forefront. So here's something to think about. In this world that's getting more and more interconnected, how might a landlocked country like Nepal, sitting right there, strategically positioned between the two most populous nations on Earth, how might it actually redefine its geopolitical destiny? Using infrastructure, using these deeper partnerships, what does its future really look like if these huge, ambitious connectivity projects like that railway actually come to full fruition? Could it transform Nepal from being landlocked to being land-linked? What would that mean?